Yirmiyahu was a prophet, was a good chaver of mine. Never understood a single word he said, but we helped him to drink his yain. And we always have some mighty fine yain. Singing Simchat Le'olam, Kol HaYiladim now. Simchat to the dagim in the deep blue sea. Simchat to you and me.
Welcome to the Haftarah Plethora video podcast, where we might not bring joy to the world, but we do talk about prophets like Jeremiah.
Nope.
What do you mean, nope? The Haftarah from Mishpatim is from Jeremiah.
Yeah, but it's a special Shabbat this week.
Of course, I forgot. It's Rosh Chodesh Adar, special Haftarah. Okay, so back to what I was saying. We do talk about prophets like Isaiah.
Nope again.
Wait, what do you mean, nope again? The Haftarah for Rosh Chodesh is from Isaiah.
Right again, but wrong again. Think money.
Oh, yeah, it's Shabbat Sh'kalim. Guess I better pay closer attention to the Luach. So we are reading from Malachim Bet, the second book of Kings. I better ditch all my notes on Jeremiah and Isaiah for this week. Anyways, I'm Larry Herman, drinking some fine whiskey tonight.
You sure you haven't started already?
Not yet, but I'll get my sips in once you go get to the chanting. But first, I'm talking Haftarah with my very fine chaver, the king of cantillation, Rick Muller. How are you doing, Rick?
Just great. One of my students is chanting this Haftarah this weekend, his bar mitzvah, so I'm looking forward to discussing it with you. But you know, there's even another level of complication besides what we talked about already. Since the reading of the Haftarah, there's a Sephardim beginning, chapter 11, and the Ashkenazim begin in chapter 12.
Usually it's the other way around. Usually the Ashkenazi reading is longer than the Sephardi. But this week, the Sephardim like to go further back into the backstory of this Haftarah.
What do you mean by backstory?
Well, for those who like political intrigue, chapter 11 of Malachim Bet is a continuation of the Elijah story during a period when the daughter of King Ahab and Jezebel, named Athaliah, murderously kills, that's kind of redundant, but she does, she is bloodthirsty.
It wasn't accidental.
No, it wasn't accidental. She eliminates most of the royal line with the exception of Joash, who's her grandson, who becomes the king in our story. The Sephardim start their reading with the story of the priest Jehoiada, who was also a brother-in-law of Athaliah, who protected Joash and restored him to the throne and returned the temple back to the one true God and away from the worship of Baal.
Sounds very complicated.
It is. And it's not at all the reason why the reading was selected for Shabbat Sh'kalim, so I think we won't go into that part of the story.
Okay. I assume we get back to the money.
Indeed. By the time we get to verse 5 of chapter 12, we're talking about money, or at least about kesef, which is either money or silver. That's the connection to Shabbat Sh'kalim, when we read about a special maftir portion about the half-shekel tax that is collected at the start of the month of Adar.
And since we're getting to the tax season, also a topical subject.
Also true. But Rick, this Haftarah is particularly meaningful to me as a transport economist.
How so? There's nothing about transport or roads here. Although I know you love the Haftarah for Yom Kippur morning from Isaiah that starts Solu Solu, pave a road, pave a road.
You're right about that. But there's a lesson in this Haftarah that plays right into the work that I used to do in Africa.
Pray tell.
Well, first, allow me to recount just a small amount from the Haftarah. The scene is King Joash realizing that the temple is not being well maintained. The people are bringing their contributions, their taxes, but the priests are using it for their own purposes. Presumably, the temple and other public buildings are being run down while the priests are living it up. So the king calls in the high priest Jehoiada and tells him in verse 8 that the priests are no longer to collect the money from the people. Instead, they're to build a special chest into which the taxes will be directly deposited.
Kind of like a tzedakah box.
Exactly. But when it's time to empty the box, both the high priest and an emissary from the king will count the money and the money will be taken to a contractor who is responsible for doing the maintenance of the temple to pay the carpenters and the builders directly, thus ensuring that the work will be done.
Makes sense. But how did they ensure that it would be used for maintenance and not for other things?
Excellent question. The king forbade the funds to be used for silver or golden vessels or other fancy objects. This money could only be used for restoration, repair, or maintenance work.
That might not have sat well with the priests.
Again, an excellent point. But Joash was a clever fellow. He still allowed some of the money that the people brought for offerings to go directly to the priests. The last verse that we read says, "Silver for guilt offerings and silver for purification offerings would not be brought to the house of Adonai." That money would be for the priests.
Smart. Bought them off by giving them a piece of the take. But why does this remind you of your work as a transport economist in Africa?
Because a big problem in Africa and elsewhere is poor maintenance of roads and infrastructure. Governments love to build big projects, but then they don't like to spend money to maintain them. It's a problem all over the world.
Yeah, here too. The potholes in the roads and the cracks in the sidewalks can kill you.
Actually, that's quite literally true, especially in many of the countries where I worked. So we devised a system with the World Bank where the taxes collected from things like gasoline went into a fund that could only be used for maintenance and not for new construction.
Did it work?
To some extent, the government leaders still wanted to build new projects that they could put their names on. So we did like Joash. Certain monies could go to the government for new projects, but the rest had to be used for maintenance.
Wow, a Haftarah with practical applications. That's pretty neat.
So Rick, what did the trope tell us in this week's Haftarah?
Okay, well, my theory is about the rare trope. So there's no pazers this week. There's no zarkaz seguls. In the first section there, the fanciest trope, the rarest trope is the dargah and the tivir in verse 3, where Yehoash is described as hayashar, the straight, the upright, the good guy. And the translation there, I don't particularly like it because it doesn't really give him that epithet, that name, like Solomon the Wise. It's verse 3, Vayas, and he made Yehoash hayashar. That's important stuff there. And I just don't think the English captures that.
Kind of like Joash the straight. Maybe
yeah.
It doesn't sound quite right, but almost like the righteous.
Yeah.
Guy.
Yeah. The halakha, the going straight down the middle of the right path.
There you go.
And then verse 5, when he talks to the priests, it's a kadma v'yazla and v'yomer Yehoash, right? Your favorite. And then kesef hakodashim is an echo of that. It really brings your attention to that phrase, to that sentence, that's the topic of the day.
Holy money.
That's right. So if you didn't know anything else about the story, if you only translated those sections, Yehoash is going to do something righteous, and he's talking to the priests about money. And then that's the first section. And then there's another one in verse 7. And then I'd like to talk about verse 12, but we're going to divide up things in pieces.
All right. So you want to start reading? How about if you read from verse 1 through verse 6? And just so that our viewers and listeners know, the commentary is found on page 1276 of Eitz Chaim, and we'll start reading in the middle of page 1277, starting with chapter 12. But first, the bracha.
Right. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And he was only 7 years old, a boy king. You got to love that kind of story. Ben Sheva Shanim Yehoash b'molcho Bishnat Sheva Liyehu Malach Yehoash Ve'arba'im Shana Malach Birushalayim בשם אמו ציוויה מבאר שבע. יהיה ציוויה. ויעש יהואש הישר בעיני אדוני כל ימיו, אשר הורהו יהוידע הכהן. רק הבמות לא סרו, עוד העם מזבחים ומקטרים בבמות. ויאמר יהואש אל הכהנים, כל כסף הקודשים אשר יובא בית אדוני כסף עובר, איש כסף נפשות ערכו, כל כסף אשר יעלה על לב איש להביא בית אדוני, ייקחו להם הכהנים איש מאת מכרו, והם יחזקו את בדק הבית לכל אשר יימצא שם בדק.
So you know, Rick, as you're reading it, and I'm looking at it again, we don't actually know how old Yoash is when he first makes this plan to repair the temple. Obviously,
I thought it was pretty close to when he first started.
Could be he was a young boy and he saw the temple was run down.
Yeah.
And he told the high priest, tell the priest to collect money and to fix up the building.
Right. But then again, now in verse 7, he's 23 years later, he's 30 years old, and they hadn't done it yet, or hadn't done it right. So he has to call him out in verse 8, Vayikra. He calls out the Hebrew verb, but he's calling him out. He's calling him to the carpet. Melech Yoash, again, the Kadma V'Yazla. Something is going to happen there. And he goes, Madu, well, why? That gets a little trope all to itself. Why haven't you done what you're supposed to be doing? And then I wanted to highlight, or it already is highlighted, I wanted to tell you about verse 12 in the middle there. Vayotzi who has a curve on top all by itself. That's an Azla Geresh. So something's happening there. And you helped me translate it. It was they would go out, they would bring it out. What was it?
So what it was is they actually brought the money out.
Right. So they weren't doing it right the first time, and now they are, or something's going on there. But a lot of trope energy is given to that big long word there.
Sure, because now the money's not being filtered through the priests. Now they have to wait until they take the money out directly and give it to the workers, the builders and the carpenters.
Right. Okay, and then the last dargah that that's there is verse 16. Velo, it's just sitting there by itself. Yechashvu et anashim is the revia on the men. So the big emphasis is that they did it so well that no check, that no thought. Yechashvu is related to choshev. There wasn't any check. There wasn't any thought to what happened from that point on.
Well,
Apparently,
it
was.
They trusted the workers.
Yeah.
It's an emphasis that the problem wasn't the workers. They didn't have to check once they gave the money to the workers because they were doing a good job.
Yeah, honestly, it says, yeah, ve'emunah. That's a good word there. No special trope on it, but that explains why there wasn't any thought to what they were doing. Like Joseph being trusted in the house of Potiphar.
Exactly. So, you know, you've just described here, we could actually write a little play or a little midrash on this entire situation here about how Yoash actually learns to be a good ruler and who he can trust. And actually, he wants to trust the priests. He just has to put in place the mechanism to be able to trust them to do the right thing.
Yep. Trust
There's a
but
moral
verify.
there.
Like
But
Reagan, right? Trust but verify.
something like that.
Yeah.
Why don't you pick it up with verse 7 and chant to the end?
Okay. Vayihi bishnat esrim v'shalosh shana lamelech Yehoash lo chizku hakohanim eberek habayit vayikra hamelech Yehoash lehoyada hakohen v'lakohanim Vayomer alehem. They must have been nervous when he started talking to them. Madua einechem mechazkim eberek habayit ve'ata al tichu chesef me'et makarechem ki leverek habayit titnuhu vayeotu HaKohanim levilti chakesef me'etam uvilti chazek et berek habayit vayikach Yehoyada HaKohen Aron echad
That's the box.
vayikol chor bidalto vayiten oto Etzel hamizbeach miyamin bevoish beit Adonai v'natnu shama hakohanim shomrei hasaf et kol hakesef amuvav et Adonai vayhi kirotam kirav hakesef baron Vayal sofer hamelech ve'akohen hagadol vayatsuru vayimnu et hakesef hanimsav et Adonai v'natnu et hakesef hamtukan al yedei osei hamlacha hamufkadim beit Adonai Vayotzeu lecharashei ha'etz v'labonim ha'osim beit Adonai v'lagorim u'chotzvei ha'even v'liknot etzim ve'avnei machzev lechazek et berek beit Adonai u'lechol Asher yetzei al habayit lechozka ach lo yeaseh beit Adonai sipa kesef mizamrot mizrakot chatzot surot kokli zahav uchli chasef min hakesef amuvav beit Adonai Kilo se hamlacha yitnuhu v'chizkuvo et beit Adonai velo yechashvu et anashim asher yitnu et hakesef hayadam latet leose hamlacha ki ve'emuna hem osim Kesef Hasham v'chesef chataot lo yuva beit Adonai lakohanim yiyu.
Excellent. You know, Rick, I wonder, they put the box right next to the Mizbeach, right next to the altar. So I can think of two reasons. One is they put it in the holiest place, maybe so that the priest would think twice about trying to take any of that money. But the other reason is they put it in a place where there was people all the time, which would have made it more difficult for anyone to have taken any of the money.
Out in the open, the light of day is a wonderful thing. It's not some secret kind of fund. It's right there for everybody to see. I like it.
What a wonderful Haftarah with all sorts of practical, as you said, practical applications. Every once in a while, we read something in the Haftarah or in the Parshat where we think about the lessons we can learn for our own lives and the lives of those who are governing us. Anyways, I get to say for this week, Shabbat Shalom, Chodesh Tov, and be happy it's Adar. And also, since it's Parshat Sh'kalim, don't forget to do your taxes.
And Purim's coming.
And Purim's coming.
Get your costume ready.
There you go. All right. Until next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.